Even though the rain is out there, it looks disagreeable. I thought I'd have a small, cozy group, but I hope I can meet your expectations. You may find the title of my talk this evening strange. Kind of a sort of David-Goliath scenario. But Catholic social thought is David with a slingshot challenging the frightening global monster Goliath. The title actually is out of the book. It's just heard by John Coleman and myself. It's available, I think, for you to look at. It's only in 1905. But I'm not going to talk about the book tonight. Except perhaps to tell you that the 16 well-known international scholars and experts gathered together to discuss the content were unanimous. Catholic social thought and teaching can make a difference if it's given a chance to be recreated and widely known, or rather make widely known its extraordinary spiritual, social, and intellectual riches. I'll describe in summary form globalization, and especially Catholic social teaching, so that you may know what I'm talking about. But I'm more interested in shocking you into grasping the potential dynamic inspiration and energy of this teaching for making a difference in our world. If only Catholics and their leaders everywhere would heed what the Spirit of God is calling them to. Here's a story that makes the same point in a simpler, more concrete way. A young, successful businessman was driving his new red Jaguar on a dirt road through a very poor neighborhood, driving fast, but still looking out for the kids, dashing unexpectedly back and forth across the narrow road. Wham! A brick suddenly smashed his Jag's side door. He angrily braked, jumped out, grabbed the skinny kid and shouted, "Just what the heck do you think you're doing? This car costs big money. Why did you throw it?" "I'm sorry. I just didn't know what else I could do," pleaded the youngster. "I threw the brick because no one could stop." Now, with tears dripping down his chin, he pointed. "It's my brother." He rolled off the curb into the ditch. He fell off his wheelchair. "I can't lift him. Would you please help me get him back into his wheelchair?" "Certainly. He's too heavy for me." So, swallowing him up in his throat, the executive did lift the boy into the wheelchair. He did more. He pulled out his handkerchief, cleaned up the scratches and cuts. God bless you. The grateful child called after the man as he made his way slowly back to the Jaguar. But he never did repair the dent. In fact, he kept the dent on his Jag to remind him not to continue to go through life so fast that someone has to throw another brick to get his attention. So sometimes, when we don't have time to listen, life throws a brick at our head. It's our own choice. Either listen to the gentle whisper of the Spirit in our soul or wait for the brick to hit us. So I hope what I tell you this evening will be halfway between a whisper of the Spirit and a brick to your Jaguar or whatever else you hold dear. I now turn to globalization. It's really not new. It's an ongoing process by which we discover that all creation is interconnected and so interdependent. Christians knew by faith that all creation was interconnected because it had a common creator. But beginning in the 20th century, scientists and social scientists began to discover this fact more empirically. It first became evident in the great growth of international trade before World War I in 1914. The nations and peoples of the world began to realize that when they traded their products and resources with other nations, all were better off, at least if they shared the benefits justly with all their people. The violence of World War I brought international trade almost to a halt. It did not recover that same importance until our times, almost a century later. But now globalization has become multidimensional, economic, politically and culturally. It's facilitated by interconnectivity technology, in particular the internet, which is at the base of the information age that drowns us all in up-to-date knowledge, much of it propaganda and advertisement for goods or ideas, making it almost impossible for ordinary people to know the truth about either what they buy or what their governments are really doing. Perhaps the TV image of Osama bin Laden sitting at his desk in some unknown Asian mountain hiding place, glibly lecturing the American people over the heads of George Bush or John Kerry a few days before the last U.S. election, gives us some sense of the outreach and interconnectedness that this new globalization gives us. In the media, public discussion, it's often limited to economics, trade, foreign investment, capital flows, mostly carried out through the agency of huge multinational corporations. Now all the world's economies and monies are linked for better or worse. In fact, as you probably know, China and Japan now hold enough US dollars of American debt, which, unloaded suddenly on the market, would crash the US economy. Such a situation was unthinkable only a few years ago. But globalization is also about sharing and helping those affected by SARS, AIDS, Asian flu, and other diseases and world economic and ecological disasters. It allows for an easy transfer of knowledge of every kind, knowledge that can fly a relief aircraft into every corner of the world, but also knowledge that can be used to crash planes into World Trade Towers in New York by terrorists. Yes, and highly sophisticated intelligence knowledge, which when unexpectedly penetrated by the journeyman of Hezbollah, could stop the heavily armored Israeli army in its tracks. Globalization can be a blessing, a great blessing, also can be a great curse. It depends on what we make of it. No matter. Our interconnectedness is and will be the dominating fact of our lives in the 21st century. Achieved largely through the internet and communication technologies such as the cell phone and others. But thus far, globalization is still dominated by Western ownership and the controlling power of American values. The majority of peoples, more than 4 billion of them, are or feel excluded from most of the benefits of globalization. In fact, what they are experiencing most is the downside of globalization. In fact, it seems that much of the new religious energy in the world, especially Islamic energy, is reacting against the dark side of globalization today, which is reserving its best gifts for small, privileged elites, such as America's 300+ billionaires, excluding billions of people by its security deficit, wherein we see whole nations, especially in Africa, collapsing into chaos, by its social deficit, which continues to widen the gap between rich and poor, not only in poor countries, but also in rich countries like our own, by its ecological deficit, which stubbornly refuses to accept the limits of nature and is fostering continual environmental disasters. Finally, by its democratic deficit, that excludes most people from being effectively represented or participating in the decisions of the vast and powerful agencies such as the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, all of which are dominated by a few rich nations, by the American government. And so we return to the question, where is God in these dominating processes of globalization? There are many in the world who would say the question is nonsensical. Currently, I guess we could say there are 3 general theories of change in the world. First, there are realists who see the whole process as simply an ongoing attempt to balance powers. No need of God's help here. Second, there are those who understand liberalism narrowly and are convinced that the whole process is determined and can be made healthy once we choose the right economic instruments or institution. Forgot there. And third, there are the idealists who look to ideals, cultural values, and religion. Of course, these theories change, they overlap, but only the last is clearly open to the reality of God's presence and action in human history. And only here is there an opening for our divine call to discover God's presence in all creation, in all situations, in all peoples, and so work with others to build up a society of love and justice. How do we discover God present and active in ourselves, in those around us, and in our world? Well, first of all, it requires that we do sincerely believe the Spirit of God, with all His divine power, is present and active in us and in our world, in all circumstances. And that it is our Christian mission to discover daily what God is asking of us and where He is leading us. I'm sure that most of us experience tensions and doubts about how we meet God outside of formal prayer, in all our involvements and our efforts to build up first ourselves, then our families, then our neighborhoods, then the whole world, a better image which will share God's infinite love, mercy, and kindness. Our basic stance towards the world, the church, towards others, and ourselves must be one of gratitude to God for the magnalia Dei, the great things He has done, is doing, and will do, through and in us, in spite of our sinfulness and because of our weakness. If our basic stance is not to recognize first the good that surrounds us, we will most likely be overwhelmed by the evident evil that crowds in on us. It must also be not only a stance of gratitude, but also of daily forgiveness, of letting go. Then we will be free enough to discern, free enough for the laborious task of reading the signs of the times, as Vatican II and all recent popes have urged us to do. I quote the doctrine of the Church of the modern world. The people of God believes that it's led by the Spirit of God. It labors to decipher authentic signs of God's presence and purpose in happenings, deeds, and desires, in which this people has a part along with other people of our age. For faith throws a new light on everything, manifests God's design for our total vocation, and thus directs the mind to solutions that are fully new. Well, reading the signs of the times comes from Scripture. Jesus scolds the Jewish leaders for being able to read the signs of the times in nature. For example, the sky is red in the morning, like the rain. But for not being able to read the signs of Jesus' own presence as the long-awaited Messiah, now present and active among them. Paul VI reminds us that this process of discernment is not a solo effort, but one carried out in a community of believers, a community that is not closed in on itself, but rather open to peoples of other faiths, other expertise, to science, and to all people of goodwill. This Catholic belief in our vocation to read in a vision of faith the signs of the times suggests that to know the deepest aspirations of people is to know what God's telling us today. Catholic social teaching, already spelled out actually in the seventh commandment of the New Catholic Catechism, is our invaluable resource in this social discernment of reading the signs of the time. This body of social teaching has been summarized in the official compendium of Catholic social doctrine of the Church, prepared by the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace under request of John Paul II, and published just before his death. It's kind of a brick, but it's very worthwhile. My only concern about it is that over half the quotes are taken from the John Paul II, so it's more a current compendium rather than a historical compendium. But it's still very worthwhile because you have everything there, and an index that's probably 120 pages. Now, it brings together a century of social teaching, as told in the introduction. But it started with Leo XIII in 1891 with encyclical about two things, where he championed the rights of workers to unionize to protect their rights against abuse by the outdoor market, free market employers. And it was all the way up to John Paul II with his own encyclical in 1981 entitled Jesuit Centre, where he rejoiced in the success of the Solidarity movement in causing Poland's communist government to stumble, and aggressively takes both communism and capitalism to task for failing to make integral humanism, human solidarity, and human rights their priority concerns. Remember, that was 1981. And though we attribute official Catholic social teaching to papal encyclicals, we must always remember that such encyclicals are the crowning work of much social justice, theological and local social teaching by synods of bishops, national bishops' conferences, local bishops, as well as the fundamental root grassroots activity and experience on the part of laborers and individuals. Rather than recite the long history of social encyclicals, I'll give you an overview of their contents as found on the Jesuit Centre's website, Faith Doing Justice. Anyway, Catholic social teaching can be described as a framework or vision by which we evaluate human relationships. It provides a set of principles for reflection, criteria, for judgment, for direction, for action. Its core elements include the following. This is by no means complete. The world is God's creation, made in God's image. Women and men are called to put things in right order, in relationship with the Creator, with all the brothers and sisters, and with the natural environment. As God's gift, human life has an inherent dignity or sacredness. This principle is the basis of fundamental human rights, beginning with right to life. Solidarity is a primary social principle. In accordance with the Creator's will, humans are born social through the cooperation of their parents with God's plan. Each person's growth in strength and knowledge comes through relations with others. No one is or can be self-made. Interrelationships are societal requirements, not individual options. The principle of subsidiarity balances power between the individual and the community, between the individual and the state. Decisions in society should be taken at the lowest competent level to protect individual and minority rights, including their rights to participate creatively in making public decisions. It's also a strong antidote to dictatorship, either the right or the left. Jesus showed special love for the people who are most dependent and in need of others, the sick, the poor, children, prisoners. This fact is the basis of the social principle that all Christian life must be marked by a preferential option for the poor. Human work is a participation in God's creation. Work, therefore, has value because of he who does the work, or she who does the work, a co-creator. And when work is done, it's co-creation with God. Lay Catholics, those not ordained, are particularly and primarily called to seek holiness by engaging in building up a just society, a civilization above, marked by caring, sharing, and sparing. Now, from these main social principles, others can be derived, including those of the common good, private property, the right to assemble, to participate, the just wage, and so forth, and their current application to such important issues as family life, politics, economics, ecology, refugees, peace and war, and so forth. So, where the dignity of every human, especially of the poor and the excluded, is respected, where solidarity, where the sharing communities are promoted, where all people have responsible participation in making these decisions, we know that God's Spirit is there. This is about personal and community religious experience. Because I believe that rousing a compelling motive or desire to act in Catholic social teaching is far more important than having a comprehensive understanding of it, I'll concentrate on the former. So how do we go about embedding these principles in daily life? Ideally, by a process of reading the signs of the times. Such a reading has its spiritual and theological roots in a spiritual vision, as I mentioned earlier, that sees everything and everyone penetrated by the presence and action of the Spirit of God. Istaya de Jardin, divine milieu. Ignatius contemplating God present and acting everywhere. We try to discover in the deepest aspirations of people, especially among the poor, what God is telling us. Ultimately, secular history is also sacred history. Reading the signs of the times, the social discernment is of history, an effort to discern in time signs and indicators of a relationship of human events with the kingdom of God. It includes both blessed and sin history, negative and positive signs. Even today, we follow Christ carrying his cross among the downtrodden of the world. It's always a humble, listening, open, cognitive exercise. Personally, I like the language of Donald Dawes, an Irish social thinker and writer. He says, when we speak of the signs of the times, we are suggesting that God is sending us a message through historical events. This means that if we read the signs of the times correctly, we are being enabled by God to interpret what is really going on in the world, perhaps behind superficial appearances, and how we ought to respond to what is going on. And of course, we're dependent on our Christian faith in adopting this whole notion of the signs of the times as a communication from God. An authentic Christian reading of the signs of the time is something quite different from interpreting a code or a divine secret. Christian reading the signs of the times it's for Christian reading of the signs of the times is a discernment of fuller and deeper meaning of some event in the world. It involves seeing, or at least having a glimpse of the event in its full cosmic context, having some sense of how it fits into the unfolding of God's plan, which for the Christian is the coming of the reign of God. Furthermore, it gives us some guidance as to how we should act or behave in order to promote the coming of the reign of God. All events in the world and in our personal lives are potential signs of the times, provided we are spiritually sensitive in a high degree and in tune with the mind of Jesus. Some events are more obvious signs of the times than others. They can be recognized even if we are somewhat slow of heart, like these two disciples were on the way to Emmaus, discovering Jesus after his resurrection. I suppose we could say that reading the signs of the times could even be described as intelligently listening to the deepest hopes and desires, sufferings and anxieties of the human family today. This reading makes us aware of our socially conditioned prejudices, our blind spots and assumptions. It demands, like liberation theology, that we accept that listening to the experience of poor people is a privileged way to come to know, to a truer understanding of the gospel and the message of Jesus. Another way to put it, this reading works in a spiritual faith atmosphere that frees people's social imagination through the use of stories, metaphors, poetry like the Bible, as well as of social analysis, to open minds to see new possibilities, alternative paradigms, to freely and socially discern informed prudential judgments in the middle of very complex ideological uncertainties in the world. This exercise, of course, is not infallible. Here are a few signs of the times that concern or should concern the church's covering us today. These are just at random. A recent quote from Benedictine sister Joan Jesuit. Religion is fast becoming the major civil, that's public, question of the century. In the public square in Canada, secularism is becoming increasingly intolerant of the presence and influence of religion and religious influence on social and political issues. The holiday tree season replaces the Christmas tree season. Reactions to the homogenizing downside of globalization and the robust presence of an active Islam are forcing other religious people to become more assertive of their own religious identity in public life. We see that each day. The sharp separation between church and state has become more and more ambiguous as church becomes religion of spirituality. The state becomes government, bureaucracy. We talk easily today of failed states, and our new Governor General seems to see herself more as representing the poor than the queen. The discovery of chaos theory in physics and a growing ecological concern, together with the new acceptance of the theory of evolution by the Church, has opened potential fruitful dialogue between some areas of science and religion. The United Nations Millennium Goals are strongly supported by many religious groups, official and unofficial. But a tougher look at today's situation shows that even if absolute poverty were to disappear, that's the ambition in 2015, I don't think that. But even so, the gap between rich and poor continues to widen in every country of the world. As the middle class weakens, so does the sustainability of public order in any democratic nation. Personally, I believe that the present neoliberal free market paradigm cannot last long. It's simply too costly in human and ecological terms. Both humans and nature are quickly reaching their last limits of toleration. With the increased emphasis on dialogue, quality of relationships gets greater emphasis than new concepts or definitions. After all, relationships is what the chief architect mentioned I think is all about. In today's world, non-governmental organizations are having significant influence as a catalyst for social justice and ecological debates. Catholics are quite active here, but largely without a Catholic public voice. Dialogue is trumpeted by church leaders, especially recent Pope John Paul II. Social ecumenism made great progress, but now is slowed by lack of strong official national leadership. Interreligious dialogue remains largely at the rhetorical level, and dialogue within the church seems to be going back, especially for the laity, but also for the priests and even bishops. We simply do not have the instruments or forms for effective dialogue in the church. And increasingly, as collegiality weakens, even with the outside world, mature understanding, social formation, and Catholic social teaching for lay Catholic leaders is almost totally lacking. Finally, I could go on, but I just have to get some word on these signs. Finally, the Vatican II document on freedom of religion seems now to be partially undermined. In recent years, the Vatican seems at times returning the pre-council position of error as no rights. For some Catholic leaders at least, only a few issues of family life, Catholic politicians no longer seem free to negotiate imperfect, best you can get compromise laws in the public forum. They have to insist that Catholic teaching be upheld in law, no matter what others believe. We have not yet really learned how to reconcile freedom of religion with an instinctive refusal to accept in practice that the Spirit of God is also present and active in other religions, peoples, for fear one religion be not as good as another. The result, in the United States and even in Canada, with a few bishops and pastors threatening members of Parliament, even the Prime Minister, with refusal of Holy Communion, unless they do exactly what their bishop or pastor tells them in their elected office. This is a very significant and dangerous precedent for the Church's voice in the public forum in the immediate future. joined with the fallout from the sexual abuse scandal, it severely weakens the Church's public credibility, even in social justice and ecological issues. When church leaders panic, they tend to revert to individual morality and forget about social morality. Just as structural or social sin is only being gradually absorbed by church leaders, so social morality in today's world is still an uncharted path for us. The church has still not caught up with the full implications of social morality. What people, especially young people today, want from religion, from the church, is not an institution or abstract statements or moral directions, but primarily religious experience of the presence of God. I believe our efforts to read the signs of the times is built on genuine spiritual experience, on discerning with humility the reality of God, or God's Spirit present and acting, not only in the individual heart, prayerful community gatherings, but also in all dimensions of human and world history. This is the spiritual basis for Catholic social teaching. Paul VI described well this existential vision, inside of which Catholics communities can read the signs of the times very confidently in his social encyclical call to action in 1972. I'll quote this paragraph. It's exhilarating. In fact, the Pope wrote it is also exhilarating. The Spirit of the Lord, who animates man and woman, renewed in Christ, continually breaks down the horizons within which their understanding likes to find security and the limits to which their activity would willingly restrict itself. There dwells within them a power which urges them to go beyond every system and every ideology. At the heart of the world, there dwells the mystery of man and woman discovering themselves to be God's children in the course of a historical and psychological process in which constraint and freedom, as well as the weight of sin and the breath of the Spirit, alternate and struggle for the upper hand. The dynamism of Christian faith here triumphs over narrow calculations of egoism. Animated by the power of the Spirit of Jesus Christ our Savior and upheld by hope, Christians involve themselves in building up the human city, one that is peaceful, just, loving, and acceptable as an offering to God. In fact, both from Romans, the expectations of a new earth must not weaken, but rather stimulate our concern for cultivating this one. For here grows the body of a new human family, a body which even now is able to give some kind of foreshadowing of the new age. It's the applicable. I think in all the social sickness, that's the one paragraph that stays with me. But underlying this exercise of reading the signs of the times, as mentioned earlier, is a spirituality. It's very old and very new. It's a form of mysticism, of contemplation in action, as we call it in Ignatian spirituality, which seeks to see and find God present, acting in all things. This is existential spirituality. There's no running away from the world or other people in order to find God, but rather a constant reaching out to the world, to other faiths, to other people, in order to find God actively at work, continuing His creation in and through men and women today. His Spirit is surely present in the global anti-war and peace movements that brought people of every faith and walk of life in most countries of the world into the streets to raise their voices against the launching of war in Iran. The demanding challenge of this spirituality is that it must be transparent, both in individuals and in the believing community, if it is to have a transformative influence on others and on the world. The vision will be credible to the skeptical world only through the compelling witness power of its bearers. It's happened in the early days of the church. Early Christians gave a compelling witness to unbelievers in their lives and actions that they really did love one another. With this faith vision, will this faith vision be compelling enough to reach, motivate, and commit a wider audience to accept and work for a more integrated world vision of more loving, caring, sharing growth community in which human rights and responsibilities of all individual communities not only acknowledge and respect, but also actively protect, especially the rights of the poorest and weakest among us. We could say at least some elements of a more fully human world vision are available in Catholic social teaching and are there for dialogue and experience. I've already mentioned the personal virtues of the bird, freedom, or spiritual detachment necessary to let go enough to reach a clear vision, spiritual vision. They are chiefly radical gratitude, inner freedom, compassion, forgiveness, nonviolence, and love. With personal or group discernment or the reading of the times, it's important to begin with a disposition of deep gratitude, thanking God and rejoicing in our own blessed history, that of the Church, that of the world. In so doing, we'll be better placed and disposed to see the sin history more clearly in its proper context. The Spirit of God is found in the presence of positive energy, consolation, inner peace, not in negative energy, confusion, or desolation. But when all is said and done, we live by faith. In loving the Church critically, we must make sure that our faith vision is clear and honest, marked by deep gratitude, fearless freedom, and the ability to let things go, as well as forgiveness, by compassion, nonviolence, forgiveness, and everywhere influenced by a preferential option for the poor. With such a vision, you can always set a short course of action, even in uncertain times. Perhaps the greatest service people of faith can give today to building and healing the troubled world is humility, a vivid recognition and acceptance of the vulnerability of all humans and all human institutions on our planet, in order to be able to stand up to the arrogant, Mr. Fix-It technological hubris of powerful elites and self-interest groups, who today are recklessly playing God with the future of both the human race and our planet. But when all is said and done, I agree with Pope Benedict, as well as the great Muslim scholar Syed Nasser, that our primary enemy in Canada, most other Western countries today, is not institutional religion, nor science, nor politics, for all their failings, but rather a growing ideological secularism that blinds itself to all that is transcendent, that dismisses out of hand our inviting vision of a loving God, confident, leading both world and church history to its fulfillment. Evangelical friends reminds me that when all is said and done, what we're trying to do here is to unmask the idols of our time. We're saying three old gods of our idols that bedeviled the Israelites, the Old Testament man, the God of Moloch, the God of power, Baum, the God of security. Well, with such extraordinary vision and inspiration available, why is Catholic social teaching still our best secret for change? There are many reasons, but I believe the chief reason is that it is not effectively understood and taught by bishops and pastors, or even mostly by Catholic schools and universities. Most of what we find in the Catechism and in the Compendium of Social Doctrine is not familiar or closely integrated into personal faith with most Catholics. But I believe there's an even more fundamental reason. Most Catholics do not understand social faith and social grace. The overwhelming individualism of our culture and of our time seems to blind us to the fact that globalization and all its consequences is not just an economic, social, and political problem. It is a profoundly religious problem, a faith problem. And that is why I've talked about what is social sin, what is social grace in today's world. I end with a striking motivation for hope, at least for me, and I think for many others in the field. It is that Catholics, perhaps especially young Catholics, are more and more working with non-governmental organizations and other groups that believe a better world is possible. I believe this vision fits well with that Catholic social teaching. I quote a couple of final paragraphs from my article in the book Globalization and Catholic Social Thought. Concerns particularly insightful personal reflection of Martin Hehir of the Third World Network based in Ottawa. This vision, Martin Hehir, challenges readers to work for a possible better world by working in a clear-eyed way in two conflicting paradigms or mindsets at the same time. In the first, which many may see as tinkering, one works within the system for fair trade, fair economic, and environmental relations for a better deal for the poor. In the second paradigm, the present corporate economic system is seen as incompatible with long-term survival. It will inevitably blow up as its exaggerated economic growth rates clash with nature's ecological limits, or urges the personnel of civil society, NGOs, to work pragmatically in the first paradigm. However, he himself emotionally lives and belongs in the second paradigm. He invites others to follow his example in the hope that by living out this vision, they can foster the creation of new trade mechanisms, systems of prices, and so forth that can serve as a transition into their alternative, better world. This idealistic, pragmatic approach fits well, I believe, with Catholic social teaching's utopian vision of how we can realistically set about building what John called the civilization of love. I believe that prayerful spiritual discernment can free us to see with new eyes, and therefore be able to go beyond social analysis or desire for gain and destroy in ourselves the false gods of slavist materialism and consumerism on which corporate neoliberalism feasts today. In faith and hope, being free enough to see the world through the eyes of the poor means living and belonging in Hore's second paradigm. To advance in this direction, the Church will, of course, require fearless, faith-filled, imaginative, and charismatic leadership at all levels of the clergy, but especially among the laity.